That Friday, I thought nothing could disturb the routine of my day. I'm Amelia Gray, a 38-year-old former literature teacher, now living a quiet life in the small town of Riverside, Missouri. After a messy divorce that left me feeling unmoored, I found solace in long drives. They gave me the space to clear my head and quiet the constant hum of anxiety that had settled in my chest. But that evening, nothing went as planned. Dark clouds had gathered on the horizon by the time I was halfway home, and the wind had picked up, rattling the trees along the winding country road. A few fat drops of rain splattered across my windshield, and soon, the sky opened up in a downpour. My old Camry sputtered as if it, too, had had enough of the day. Moments later, the engine died completely. My stomach sank. I was on a desolate stretch of road with no cell service to call for help. After trying the ignition a few times to no avail, I debated walking to the nearest town, but the rain was relentless and the muddy road looked more like a river with each passing minute. Resigned to waiting it out, I sat in my car, the rhythmic drumming of the rain my only companion. Then, out of nowhere, I saw headlights approaching. Relief washed over me as an old Ford truck slowed to a stop beside me. The driver rolled down his window, and to my surprise, it was Ben Hollister, one of my former students. He was older now, in his early 20s, but his face was unmistakable. "Miss Gray," he said, clearly as surprised as I was. "I didn't expect to see you out here." I explained my predicament, and he offered to give me a ride, mentioning that he worked nearby and was heading back to town. Normally, I would have hesitated, but the thought of sitting alone in the dark car for hours made the decision easy. Once in his truck, I felt an immediate sense of warmth and safety. Ben chatted about his weekend job as a driver and his plans to move to Chicago to pursue a career. His enthusiasm was infectious, and for a moment, I forgot about my troubles. But as we navigated the muddy road, the rain worsened. Soon, the truck struggled to push forward. The wheels spun uselessly, and Ben cursed under his breath before stopping. "Well," he said with a rueful grin, "looks like we're stuck for now." I couldn't help but laugh. This isn't quite how I pictured my evening ending. Ben chuckled and leaned back in his seat. "Don't worry, Miss Gray. We'll figure it out. Sometimes you just have to wait for the storm to pass." The rain hammered down around us, isolating the truck from the world outside. As I looked out at the endless dark fields, I couldn't shake the feeling that something about this night, this strange twist of fate, was going to change everything. The rain outside drummed steadily against the truck's roof as silence settled between us. It wasn't an awkward silence, but one heavy with unspoken thoughts. I stared out the window at the dark, rain-soaked fields, though my mind was far from the scene outside. My thoughts kept circling back to that moment, how our conversation had shifted, how it felt when Ben's hand briefly brushed mine. Ben finally broke the quiet. "You know," he said, his voice calm but deliberate, "I always wondered why you stopped teaching." The question hit like a pebble dropped into still water, sending ripples through my mind. I hesitated before answering, unsure of how much to reveal. "It wasn't my choice, really," I admitted, my voice quieter than I intended. "After my divorce, everything changed. I just couldn't keep up with it all. It felt like I lost myself somewhere along the way." I glanced at Ben, half expecting him to respond with pity or discomfort. Instead, his expression was thoughtful, his eyes focused on me in a way that felt genuine. "You were always one of the reasons I enjoyed school," he said after a moment, his tone steady. "The way you talked about books, about life. It made things feel bigger than just what was in front of us. You made it easy to believe in something more." His words caught me off guard. It had been so long since I felt like I made a difference to anyone. I smiled faintly, more out of reflex than anything else. "I think you're giving me too much credit, Ben. You were always one of the bright ones, focused, driven. I just happened to be there." He shook his head, his smile faint but sure. "No, you were more than that. You still are." The sincerity in his voice was almost too much. I looked away, trying to ignore the sudden warmth rising in my chest. Before I could think of a response, a gust of wind rattled the truck, and Ben leaned forward to adjust the heater. The motion brought him slightly closer, and for a moment I caught his scent, something faintly woodsy and clean, grounding in its simplicity. "Do you miss it?" he asked, his voice quieter now. I turned back to him. "Miss what?" "Teaching, inspiring people, being that person who makes others believe in something more." The question hung in the air, and I realized I didn't have a simple answer. Instead of responding, I watched him, wondering how this young man sitting beside me, someone I'd once known as just a boy in the back of a classroom, could make me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in years. "I think I miss who I used to be," I finally said. Ben didn't say anything, but his gaze lingered on me, steady and understanding. In that moment, something shifted. The air between us felt heavier, more electric. He leaned slightly closer, and I didn't pull back. When his lips brushed mine, it was tentative, almost like a question. My heart stuttered in my chest, but I didn't pull away. The kiss was gentle, warm, and filled with a sincerity I couldn't ignore. When he pulled back, his eyes searched mine. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice soft. "Don't be," I whispered, barely able to find my breath. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I meant it. After that kiss, something shifted between us. It wasn't awkward, but the weight of what had happened lingered in the air like the fading echoes of a storm. I didn't know what to say, and Ben seemed equally unsure. The sound of rain had softened to a gentle patter on the truck's roof, a rhythmic reminder of the world outside that felt distant and unimportant. Ben finally spoke, his voice cutting through the quiet. I probably shouldn't have done that. He glanced at me quickly, then back at the road ahead, his hands tightening on the steering wheel. I hesitated, my thoughts tangled. "It's not about whether you should have," I said softly, my words surprising even myself. "It's about what it meant." He exhaled slowly, his shoulders relaxing a fraction. "And what did it mean to you?" I wanted to answer, but my mind felt like it was walking a tightrope. There was a part of me still holding on to the person I thought I was supposed to be, the cautious, reserved version of myself who avoided risks, who stayed within the lines. But tonight had thrown all of that into question. "I don't know yet," I admitted, finally looking down at my hands. We fell silent again, but it wasn't the kind of silence that begged to be filled. It was as if we were both letting the gravity of the moment settle, each of us trying to figure out how to move forward. The rain had eased enough for us to attempt driving again, and Ben started the truck. The tires skidded briefly in the mud before finding traction. We made our way down the road slowly, the headlights cutting through the misty darkness. As we drove, Ben spoke again, his tone gentler now. "You know, when I was in your class, I always thought you had everything figured out. You were confident, strong, like nothing could shake you." I laughed softly, a bitter edge creeping into the sound. "That's the funny thing about life. People only see what you let them." Back then, I thought if I looked put together enough, maybe I could fool myself into believing it too. He didn't reply right away, and when he did, his words were simple but heavy with meaning. "You don't have to pretend with me." The sincerity in his voice was like a thread pulling at something deep inside me. I turned to him, studying the way his jaw tightened as he focused on the road, the way his hands gripped the wheel just enough to show his nerves. "I don't know if I can be that honest," I said quietly. Ben slowed the truck and pulled to the side of the road, turning off the engine. The sudden stillness made my pulse quicken. He looked at me then, his gaze steady and unflinching. "You don't have to have all the answers right now," he said. "But don't run from this. Don't run from me." His words hung in the air, and I realized he wasn't asking for anything more than what I could give. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his honesty settle over me. "I'm not running," I whispered, though my voice wavered. Ben smiled faintly, his relief evident. For the first time that night, I felt something other than fear. I felt the glimmer of hope. The rain picked up again, tapping softly against the windows. It was as if the storm was giving us permission to stay a little longer in this fragile moment of connection. And for now, that was enough. We drove in silence for a while. The rain had eased to a light drizzle, and the empty road stretched out before us, reflecting the soft glow of the truck's headlights. Inside the cab, the air felt thick with unspoken thoughts. I stared at my hands resting on my lap, as my mind replayed the events of the evening in an endless loop. Every glance, every word, every touch. Each moment felt like a thread pulling me further away from the person I thought I was. Ben's voice finally broke the quiet, low and hesitant. "I guess I could have just taken you home and acted like nothing happened," he said, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "But that wouldn't be the truth. Something changed tonight, didn't it?" His words hung in the air, and I felt the weight of them settle deep in my chest. I turned to look at him. The dim light from the dashboard illuminated his face, highlighting the tension in his jaw, the careful restraint in his expression. "Yes," I said softly, "something changed, but I'm not sure what it means yet." Ben slowed the truck and pulled off onto the shoulder, cutting the engine. The sudden stillness felt deafening, broken only by the faint tapping of rain against the windows. He turned to face me fully, his gaze steady but vulnerable. I don't have all the answers, Amelia, he admitted. But I know this: tonight wasn't just random. We're here for a reason. I looked away, my breath catching. His words stirred something in me that I wasn't ready to confront. I had spent so long building walls around myself, convincing myself that keeping things simple and controlled was the only way to survive. And yet here he was, offering me something messy, uncertain, but undeniably real. "You're young, Ben," I said, my voice wavering. "You have your whole life ahead of you. And you," he interrupted gently, "are still strong, smart, and worth so much more than you give yourself credit for. This isn't about age, it's about us, about what we feel." His words struck a chord, and for a moment I couldn't speak. I closed my eyes, trying to steady myself. Could I allow myself to believe him? To take a chance on something I didn't fully understand? "I don't know if I'm ready for this," I whispered, barely audible. Ben's expression softened, and he leaned forward slightly, his voice calm and reassuring. "You don't have to be. I'm not asking for answers tonight. Just don't walk away from this moment. Let's see where it takes us." His patience disarmed me. I met his eyes, searching for doubt but finding none. He wasn't pushing or demanding. He was simply offering a chance. A choice. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding in my chest. "Okay," I said finally. "Let's take it one step at a time." This smile was small but genuine, and I felt a flicker of warmth in the cold uncertainty that had surrounded me for so long. The rain started up again, soft but steady, as Ben restarted the engine and pulled back onto the road. For the first time in years, I felt something other than fear. I felt the faintest glimmer of hope, like a distant light cutting through the fog. And as we drove on, I realized that maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop holding myself back and see where the road would lead.